Before we talk about how to actually use a camera, we need to understand a little bit about cameras. And honestly, cameras and light are super important, especially when you get into professional cameras. So a couple of things you need to understand is obviously there are all different sizes of cameras. And the size of the camera and the type of imaging device really tells us how that camera is going to handle light. So let's start our discussion by talking about how light is let in the camera. Light is let in the camera the same way that light is let in your eye, through an iris. And so the wider the iris is, the more light that comes in, and the smaller the iris is, the less light that comes in. Seems pretty obvious, right? Well, in cameras, we want to try to keep our iris kind of in the middle. So that sometimes involves changing where our subject is. Now, a lot of times in news shooting, you can only change where the camera position is, and that's okay. But when you're doing commercial production or different things like that, or shooting a reporter where you can move the action, you always want to keep in mind where the best light is. You don't want someone to be backlit. Much better to have the light coming from behind the camera person so that the subject is illuminated and not the background. But let's talk a little bit more about imaging devices. The imaging devices you're going to find in a camera are called CCDs, and that stands for Charge Coupled Device. So the lens takes the light and focuses it on a CCD. This CCD is covered in diodes, and those are called photosites. The more diodes, the better the image. So the larger the CCD, the more diodes can fit, the better the image. A large camera often has larger CCDs, and a lot of times some professional cameras have 3 CCDs. It's these 3 CCDs that are going to give you the best quality because they are taking the information and separating it out even further. But let's talk about how a CCD works. So the light hits the CCD, and once the light hits that CCD, it turns our image into an electrical charge. And just like an artist paints a scene with contrasting dark and light areas, a CCD creates a video picture by recording light intensity. So as I said before, some larger cameras have 3 CCDs, one for each primary color of light. So our primary colors of light, which means these 3 colors of light, can mix together to make any color we can imagine. Those 3 primary colors are red, green, and blue. So it takes the light that's coming in the camera and passes it through what's called a beam splitter. That beam splitter then separates the image into those 3 primary colors and creates 3 separate images and the information for those images on 3 separate CCDs, and then eventually mixes it back together. But in smaller cameras, there's only one CCD, and all the information is saved on that one chip. If I've confused you, maybe Bill the engineer can explain it a little better.